So, what is learning? So, learning is a process. So, it's important to sit with this for a little bit. So, it involves being introduced to a topic, and then you got to get to know more about the topic, right? So, you're introduced, get to know more, then you have to explain the topic, right? So, that's the next sort of in the process is that you're able to actually explain it. That could be in verbal and written form, may just be in one, but you want some kind of being able to explain that topic, putting it in their own words. Then you want to have students use that topic. That's the next part of the process. How are they going to use it? Are they going to use it in writing, or are they going to use it in an application of some sort? You want to put it into practice. And then you want some critical thinking about that topic. What are some questions that they have about that topic? What are some reflections that they have about putting it into practice? Right? So you have this sort of whole process of kind of being introduced, of having to explain it, in your own words, to putting it into practice, and then critically reflecting on it and thinking about it and asking questions and sitting back from it. So getting to know it and then sitting back. So what are these features? So some of these features is active, right? So it's while the learner's going through this process, they're building these mental models of that, how it is, that topic in relationship to the world. So they have to explore, they interact, they talk with others, they make connections. So those are all things that you want to incorporate, into their learning. It builds on prior knowledge, and we're going to talk about that, in a future lesson, because that's tricky, right? It can be good, or it may be that they have some misconceptions, about that. So that's why it's really important that part of this process is learning about students and students learning about their prior knowledge and how it affects this new learning. Also, learning, it occurs in a complex social environment. This doesn't happen just on someone's own, right? They're always interacting with someone else, whether even if they are online, they may be interacting through discussion boards or at least with the instructor with feedback and producing things. So it needs to be, think of the whole cultural context that this learner is coming into and experiencing this new knowledge, and maybe some of the challenges, that may come with that. Also, it's best when it's situated in authentic context. So anytime that you can include field trips or assessments that are more authentic and related to what you want students to learn, really think about, how to create that authentic context, because learning in the classroom is not necessarily where the student will be using this knowledge. So we want to try and bring in those authentic contexts. But also learners have agency, right? Learning is, all about, they have their own motivation, they have their own level of engagement, they have different, ways that they're used to interacting with learning. So they're going to bring all of that, with them. So we have to think of that agency too, and what that means, for the students. Also have to think about cognitive overload, because if there's too much, then people can start to break down and kind of stop learning because it's too much. So we have to be really cognizant of how much and how quickly students are learning. So there's a lot in that whole process. There's a lot of different things that you need to think of. So basically, to sum up, learning is a process. It results in change in knowledge, change in behavior, change in attitude. But this process needs to be properly sequenced and scaffolded so that it doesn't trigger cognitive overload, and it's actually supporting students in their learning. So we need to recognize as instructors the inputs that we're providing for students that impact their learning, and then also the outputs that signify their learning. And that has resulted in a change in knowledge and behavior. That's what we're looking for in the whole process, and then in those outputs. So some important points to remember that they're not paying attention all the time, right? So think about that, as you're talking and probably happening right now as you're listening to this, that your brain starts to make connections, right? It starts to connect to things, or it makes you think about things. And that's happening to students all the time. So that's why it's really a good practice to break or chunk the lessons into 10 or 15 minute bites. So that might be a 10 or 15 minute like lecture information, setting up something, and then having students explain, do some kind of activity, because you want to make sure that you're not just having just concept after concept without any point for students to process that and put it into those stages that I talked about at the beginning, those learning processes. So make sure those are there so that they have the time to make those connections before they move on to another concept. So you want to pique their interest, you want to keep them focused, and so therefore you also want to break up your instructional strategies. So meaning that don't do the same thing every week. So even if you do break it into 10 to 15 minute chunks, make the activities different, but purposefully designed, to link up and align with what you want students to learn. But you want to mix it up because you want to keep students' attention so that they don't default into just, oh, I'm doing the same thing, I don't have to think about it. We want to keep them thinking. Okay, so that's what learning is, the learning process. And as we go through, we're going to keep all of this in mind as we are designing a course and thinking about the course in every aspect.